My husband finally cut off his toxic mom and sister when they had the audacity to demand we give up our dream house for my jobless sister-in-law, her deadbeat, gaming-addict husband, and their 6 kids. My in-laws have a very toxic relationship with my husband, and it is starting to affect my life. You see, while growing up, my husband used to be the golden child, and my mother-in-law was extremely close to him. Jacob has told me that because his dad used to be quite busy with work, his mother and he spent a lot of time together. But I have noticed that his sister, Sarah, isn't treated the same by my mother-in-law. Although I'm sure my mother-in-law loves both her children, I've noticed time and time again that she favors my husband. I'm sure Sarah must have felt that growing up, which is why my husband has always tried to fill the role by being a good older brother to her and always being there for her. The thing is, both Sarah and my mother-in-law would sometimes behave so absurdly that it crossed the line. For example, when Jacob and I first started dating, he was still a recent college graduate, and my in-laws, including Sarah, all lived in the same house. My in-laws had given Jacob an entire floor to himself so he could have his own privacy and invite whoever he wanted. Sometimes he would invite me over to his place to spend the night with him. However, on several occasions in the morning, Sarah would barge into our room while we were still sleeping without knocking. Sometimes we were not even properly dressed, but she would act as if it were completely normal and start talking to Jacob about random things. This was extremely weird for me, as I was uncomfortable with her seeing me in my lingerie. Naturally, I talked to Jacob about it and told him I wouldn't come over again unless he installed a lock on his door. He agreed, but the next morning, when Sarah tried to barge in and found the door locked, she started yelling at us, demanding to know why the door was locked. She banged on the door, insisting that Jacob let her in. Jacob finally let her in, and she stormed into the room, questioning why he installed the lock in the first place. When she noticed me, she pointed at me and started yelling at him, asking if it was because of this skank. I was shocked by how rude and disrespectful she sounded. Jacob told her it was his decision to install the lock, but Sarah wasn't convinced. She angrily told him that they were siblings and shouldn't have any secrets. Jacob tried to explain that he simply wanted privacy, especially while sleeping. Hearing this, Sarah turned to me and yelled that this was all my fault, saying I was coming between her and her brother. This was a bit much for me, so I excused myself. While I was away, I could hear her continuing to yell and Jacob trying to pacify her. When she finally left, Jacob came to comfort me. He was apologetic for her behavior and promised to talk to her again so she'd apologize to me. The next weekend, she did apologize but gave a pathetic excuse, saying she urgently needed to talk to Jacob so she thought it would be okay to come in. Jacob firmly asked her not to disturb us again, and she nodded meekly. Although this issue was resolved, it wasn't her only weird behavior. If Jacob and I disagreed on something trivial like movies and Sarah was around, she'd start telling him how he should date someone who shared his tastes and that we weren't right for each other. Jacob would give her a disapproving look, but she would just smirk. There were also times when she would ask uncomfortable questions about my past, trying to dig into my life. Jacob and I had always been open with each other, but I didn't feel comfortable sharing details with his sister. Regardless, she would ask things like, "Why did your ex break up with you?" Or say comments like, "My brother's past girlfriend was prettier than you." I stayed quiet initially, but after a while, I had enough. I responded by saying that I liked my ex's family better because they weren't nosy. This seemed to shut her up for a while. While Sarah's behavior was odd, my mother-in-law wasn't any better. When I first came into Jacob's life, she would ignore me, but once she realized we were serious, she started acting like I was stealing her son away. She would ignore me during dinners or family gatherings. Jacob sometimes noticed and would talk to her, but she never changed. One time, she called me spoiled because my parents had sent me to private school. She even tried to talk Jacob out of marrying me, suggesting he could find someone better. When Jacob proposed, both she and Sarah called to convince me to end the relationship and give back the ring. I told them this was out of line and refused. They eventually stopped, but I could see how upset they were. My mother-in-law grudgingly told me that I should strive to be the best wife and take care of Jacob the way she had all these years. Sarah, on the other hand, called me a gold digger and threatened to expose me. After this, I told Jacob everything, and he was upset, but they held firm on their opinion. Although he told me to ignore them, it hurt that they wouldn't accept me. Jacob and I had saved up for our wedding, so when my mother-in-law offered to pay for half, we declined. Instead of being happy, she was upset, feeling he didn't need her. To compromise, we let her organize the rehearsal dinner, and she agreed. However, things took an unexpected turn. At the rehearsal, the setup was underwhelming: plastic tablecloths on picnic tables and cold Mexican food. She acted upset throughout the evening, saying she couldn't wait for the wedding to be over. Eventually, my father-in-law escorted her out. Sarah tried to defend her, but my father-in-law shut her down. It was a disaster, and I started worrying that these two women would somehow spoil my wedding. It sounds like you've experienced an incredibly challenging time with your in-laws, and I can understand why you'd be left feeling both frustrated and defensive over the situation. Navigating boundaries with family, especially when those boundaries aren't respected, is difficult, and it sounds like you've been really clear about what's acceptable in your relationship and your home. From standing up for yourself about the house to establishing limits with your husband's family, you've shown a lot of resilience. It seems like your husband has come to understand the seriousness of these issues, too, which is encouraging. His willingness to support you and confront his family is essential in situations like this. Hopefully, this experience leads to stronger boundaries and fewer conflicts in the future, especially with his family realizing that you're both serious about your limits. Installing cameras was a smart move for your peace of mind, too. It's unfortunate that they showed up in person, but it shows you were prepared to protect your space and ensure your safety. It sounds like you've done all you can to set things right on your end, and I hope things calm down and that this marks a fresh start without so much family tension.